In October 2019, I posted a video on my channel how to shoot the moon with the Sony A7R Mark IV, and I used the G Master lens from Sony 100 to 400 millimeters plus the 2x teleconverter plus later on the digital clear zoom built into Sony A7 series camera bodies, and I achieved quite nice and crisp results, which I liked a lot. But recently I also got the G lens from Sony with an extended focal length from 200 to 600 millimeters. And of course, if you combine a 600 millimeter focal length with a 2x teleconverter, you end up at a focal length of 1200 millimeters, which brings you even closer to your subject. Typical applications of a lens like this are sports photography or wildlife, in particular birds, where you keep a safe distance but you want to get close to your subject by a longer focal length. But of course, it's also perfectly suitable for another moon shooting, and that's what this video is all about. And then just 2 days ago, on May 7, 2020, there was a unique opportunity to try out this lens in a new moon shooting. And the situation we had is that we had a supermoon, and that supermoon in particular is called a flower moon because of its occurrence in spring. And in this rare constellations, the moon is closer to Earth than it usually is. And that makes the moon appearing bigger and brighter, so a unique opportunity for me to try out this lens. You see here an article from BBC where people across the world were trying to shut the moon and capturing that rare constellation. It's, by the way, the last opportunity you had in 2020. It will not come back in this way in the course of the year, so people have to wait if they miss the opportunity. And of course, nice shots. But if you look at that moon, for instance, I think in combination with that Ranger's Tower is very nice, but I wanted to focus purely on the moon and get the brightest, crispiest shot of the moon I ever had. So let's get started with the video. I hope you enjoy this little journey into the night sky, and let's look at the images and the results from my shooting. The Sony G lens 200 to 600 mm brings in a normal focal length for a very affordable price tag. And there is a G Master lens with 600 mm, a prime lens you can purchase from Sony. Widest open aperture then is f4, and this lens costs you about $13,000. And since I'm not mainly a wildlife photographer, I would not spend $13,000 to get a 600 mm focal length. The 200 to 600 mm in contrast typically costs about $1,800 to $1,900, and I got this one with a special discount for $1,700, which is very affordable for 600 millimeters. Of course, you have constraints on the aperture side. The widest open aperture is f5.6, and if you zoom into 600 millimeters, your widest open aperture is f6.3. So you have to make compromises in the amount of light falling on the sensor, but in general that lens worked very well for what I wanted to do with it, and I'm going to show a couple of examples in a moment. In addition, you get optical image stabilization on the lens, as well as in combination with the in-body image stabilization of the Sony A7R Mark IV, makes a terrific combination. From time to time it's nice just to sit somewhere in the backyard, for instance, with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, the camera next to you on standby, and if a nice bird is sitting on the rooftop, just take the camera, zoom in and take the shot. And in this way you can get nice close-up shots of small little animals which you would not get without a focal length of 600 mm, or surprising children when you go to the zoo and using that focal length to look into the eye of the tiger. I think there are many applications of these lenses, of course with the constraints on aperture I mentioned before. And the way this works is simple. If you use a 2x teleconverter on the 200 to 600 mm G lens from Sony, you basically have to also multiply the aperture by 2. So in other words, if you are at the maximum zoom of 600 millimeters, you will have a widest open aperture of 6.3. If you multiply this by 2, you end up at an aperture of f13, which means your ISO value, of course, needs to be chosen higher than if you would have that 13,000 G Master lens, with a widest open aperture of f4. But since the Sony A7R Mark IV has terrific ISO behavior and low noise behavior in general, it's not a problem if you go up to an ISO of 1600, for instance. So let's turn back time by 2 days, going towards May 7 in 2020, going through my backyard and finding the Sony A7R Mark IV with that G lens 200 to 600 millimeters mounted on the teleconverter and the teleconverter mounted on the camera body. It's a nice combination. You see how small the camera body is compared to this lens combination here. And I mounted my camera on a very stable tripod because you don't want to have the risk of shakes or vibrations. And the tripod head I used is from Arca Swiss. It's a very sophisticated one with all kinds of screws where you can fine adjust your perspective on the camera and the way you see the moon at the horizon. I'm not going to repeat here my tutorial on how to shoot the moon, but I linked the video from October 2019 below in the info box. But as a general rule of thumb, in contrast to other night sky photography, and because the moon is a very bright object on the night sky, you go for a low ISO value and you go for a short exposure time. Looking quickly at my camera live display here, I was shooting completely in manual mode. I had the timer set to 10 seconds because when I do adjustments, I want the camera to become completely to a standstill. No shakes and vibrations. Single shooting, of course, spot metering, spot focus. I was using autofocus in contrast to normal night photography where I typically use manual focus. 1/50th of a second of exposure time here, an ISO value of 100. The aperture is constrained to widest open at f13 because we have 6.3 as the widest open aperture without the 2x teleconverter, and as I explained before, you have to multiply this by 2, so you end up naturally at a widest open aperture situation of f13. I was using the full 60 megapixel resolution, of course, and then the raw image because that captures the most information for my shooting here. I should say the best result I achieved with an ISO of 50, which is the lowest ISO value available on the Sony A7R Mark IV, and is also in line with the so-called Looney 11 rule, where you say that your exposure time should be the reciprocal of the ISO value. And of course the Looney 11 rule also suggests an aperture of f11, which is not possible in my constellation here because f13 with the 2x converter is the widest open aperture I can achieve. So I used f13 but 1/50 seconds of exposure time and 50 ISO. So here's the best result from that moon shooting, and if we go quickly into the metadata, you see that shot was taken on May 7 in 2020. That's the night when this super flower moon occurred on the night sky. It was shortly after 10 p.m. and you see the high resolution here of that Sony A7R Mark IV sensor. Exposure time was at 1/50th of a second, aperture f13, and the ISO was chosen at 50, in line with what I just explained. And the focal length was 1200 millimeters, which comes from the widest zoom on the 200 to 600 millimeter lens. 600 millimeter times 2x teleconverter gives 1200 millimeters. And it's a nice shot. There was quite some post-processing required to get the moon popping like you see it here. And if we go into the develop section, you actually see the raw image as it came out of the camera and my post-processing after I imported this into Lightroom. In general, a nice result, very good. And let's maybe quickly zoom into this. So if you look here, you get a lot of structure, a lot of details. Look at this part at the outer boundaries of the moon, and I think it's a nice shot. Later then, I again activated the clear image zoom, and Sony calls this technology pixel super resolution technique. And I remember when I posted my moon video tutorial in October 2019, some people commented and said that's just a simple crop, and I respectfully disagree to that. There is some enhanced digital technology underlying that with algorithms Sony developed in proprietary ways. And I think, in my experience, and I'm playing with these technologies for quite a while, that the pixel super resolution technology is giving you a better result than just simple image cropping. So let's have a look at the result, and then I'm concluding the video here. If you liked the video, if you liked that flower moon pictures, give me a thumbs up. If you like my channel, you are invited to subscribe to stay tuned on my content. Thanks for watching, and peace out.